Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in the state of Kentucky, in the United States. His home was a very small log cabin, built from rough wooden logs. It had only one room, and his family lived a very simple life there. Abraham's family was poor. His father, Thomas Lincoln, worked as a farmer. The work was hard, and the family often struggled to have enough food and money. His mother, Nancy Lincoln, was a kind and gentle woman. She loved her children and wanted Abraham to grow into a good and honest man. Schools were rare in the place where Abraham lived. Because of this, he did not receive much formal education as a child. Even though he did not go to school often, Abraham loved to learn. He borrowed books from neighbors and read them whenever he had the chance. When Abraham was 7 years old, his family moved to Indiana. They were looking for better land and a new start. After a long journey, they built a new log cabin and started their life again. 2 years later, tragedy struck. Abraham's mother became very sick with a disease called milk sickness. In 1818, his mother passed away. Abraham was only 9 years old, and he was heartbroken. A year later, his father married again. His new wife, Sarah Bush Johnston, became a loving stepmother to Abraham. Sarah saw that Abraham loved to read, and she encouraged him. She even brought books into the house for him. Abraham taught himself. He read slowly and carefully, trying to understand every word. As Abraham grew older, he spent most of his time working on the farm. He chopped wood, carried water, and helped take care of the animals. Abraham grew into a very tall and thin young man. People often noticed him because he was much taller than others. Abraham loved to tell stories. He could make people laugh and think at the same time. When he was a young man, Abraham traveled down the Mississippi River on a flatboat. It was his first time seeing the wider world. In New Orleans, Abraham saw something that shocked him. He saw enslaved people being sold in a market. This moment stayed with him for the rest of his life. He believed that slavery was wrong. At the age of 22, Abraham moved to Illinois. This place would become his true home. Abraham did not want to spend his whole life as a farmer. He wanted to use his mind and help people. Abraham decided that he wanted to study law. He believed that understanding the law would help him change people's lives. He had no money for school, so he taught himself. He borrowed law books and studied them late into the night. After years of study, Abraham finally became a lawyer. He began working in small towns across Illinois. People trusted Abraham because he was honest and fair. Many called him the most trustworthy lawyer they knew. Over time, Abraham became interested in politics. He believed that good laws could make life better for everyone. In 1834, Abraham was elected to the Illinois state legislature. He was only 25 years old. Around this time, Abraham met a woman named Mary Todd. She was educated, confident, and very interested in politics. They talked for hours about ideas, books, and the future of the country. Slowly, they fell in love. In 1842, Abraham and Mary got married and started their life together in Springfield, Illinois. They built a home and soon had children. Abraham loved spending time with his family and telling stories to his sons. Abraham and Mary faced great sadness when their son Edward died at a very young age. This loss deeply affected both of them. Despite his personal pain, Abraham continued his work in politics. He believed he had a duty to serve the country. At this time, the United States was divided over one major issue: slavery. Some states supported it, while others wanted it to end. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln debated a powerful politician named Stephen Douglas. These debates were watched by thousands of people. Even though he lost the election, his words made him famous across the country. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was chosen as a candidate for president. It was a surprising decision for many people. Lincoln traveled and gave speeches about unity, freedom, and the future of the nation. On November 6, 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. But Lincoln's victory caused a crisis. Several southern states decided to leave the Union. In 1861, the Civil War began. It would become the bloodiest war in American history. Abraham Lincoln entered the White House during one of the most dangerous moments in American history. The country was already falling apart. Every day, Lincoln received reports from the battlefield. Each report brought news of more deaths and more suffering. Lincoln often visited soldiers in hospitals and camps. He wanted to see the reality of the war with his own eyes. In 1863, Lincoln made one of the most important decisions of his life. He signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This decision changed the meaning of the war.
Boys.
Now, the fight was not only for the Union, but also for freedom. In 1863, one of the most important battles took place at Gettysburg. Thousands of soldiers lost their lives there. After the battle, Lincoln gave a short but powerful speech. Today, we know it as the Gettysburg Address. In April 1865, the war finally came to an end. The Union had survived. Lincoln dreamed of rebuilding the country and bringing the people together again. On the evening of April 14, 1865, Lincoln went to the theater with his wife. He wanted a moment of rest after years of war. Lincoln and his wife took their seats in the theater box. The play had already begun, and the audience was laughing and relaxed. Behind them, a man quietly entered the box. His name was John Wilkes Booth. Suddenly, a gunshot echoed through the theater. The audience froze in shock. Doctors rushed to help Lincoln, but his wound was too severe. He was carried across the street to a small house. Lincoln lay unconscious through the night as people gathered outside in silence. The nation held its breath. On the morning of April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln passed away. He was 56 years old. News of his death spread quickly across the country. Millions of people mourned the loss of their president. Lincoln's body was carried across the country by train so that people could say goodbye. Lincoln had preserved the Union and helped end slavery. His actions changed the future of the United States forever. From a poor boy in a log cabin to one of the most respected leaders in history, Abraham Lincoln's life showed that determination and honesty can change the world. Even after his death, thousands of people stood in line for hours just to see Abraham Lincoln one last time. His body was placed in the Capitol, where ordinary citizens could walk past and pay their respects. The funeral train traveled more than 1,500 miles across the country, stopping in many cities along the way. For millions of formerly enslaved people, Lincoln's name became a symbol of freedom and hope. After the war, the United States began the long and difficult process of rebuilding and healing. Over time, statues and monuments were built to honor Abraham Lincoln across the country. His life story was taught in schools, and children learned about the boy who rose from poverty to lead a nation. Many future leaders said they were inspired by Lincoln's honesty, courage, and determination. Lincoln is remembered not only for winning a war, but for defending the idea that all people are equal. His story reminds us that even in the darkest times, one honest and determined person can change the course of history. After his death, people carefully preserved Lincoln's letters and speeches, knowing they were part of history. His words were printed in newspapers and books, spreading his ideas to people who had never seen him in person. Children across the country grew up reading stories about the boy from the log cabin who became president. Politicians often quoted Lincoln when they spoke about freedom, unity, and justice. Years later, Lincoln's face was placed on American money, reminding people of his role in saving the nation. Lincoln's face was carved into Mount Rushmore, alongside other important American presidents. Historians spent decades studying his decisions, debating whether he had made the right choices during the war. They discovered not just a hero, but a complex human being who made difficult choices in impossible situations.
Soldiers wrote letters home describing how Lincoln's speeches gave them hope during the war. Many freed men and women named their children Abraham to honor the man who helped secure their freedom. Lincoln's love of storytelling became part of his legacy, and many of his jokes and stories were passed down through generations. He became known as Honest Abe, a symbol of truth in a world where politics was often filled with lies. Schools, streets, and even entire cities were named after Lincoln. His home in Springfield was preserved so that future generations could see where he had lived and worked. People traveled from across the country to walk through his rooms and imagine his daily life. One of Lincoln's most famous letters was written to his son's teacher, asking him to teach the boy to be honest and kind. This letter became famous because it showed the kind of father Lincoln was. Students memorized parts of the Gettysburg Address to understand the power of simple and meaningful words. In 1922, the Lincoln Memorial was officially opened to the public. Visitors read his words carved into the stone walls and reflected on their meaning. More than a century later, people still quote Lincoln's Gettysburg Address when they speak about democracy and freedom. During the civil rights movement of the 1960s, many activists looked back at Lincoln's words for inspiration. Standing before his statue, leaders reminded the nation that the fight for equality was not yet finished. Lincoln's speeches were translated into many languages and studied not only in America but around the world. Filmmakers and writers continued to tell Lincoln's story, bringing his life to new generations through books and movies. People are still fascinated by Lincoln because he was not perfect, yet he tried to do what he believed was right. Today, millions of people learn about Lincoln online, watching documentaries, reading articles, and listening to stories like this one. His life reminds us that leadership is not about power, but about responsibility and courage. The boy who once read books by candlelight is now remembered as one of the most important figures in world history. His story is not just about the past, it is a reminder of what one determined human being can achieve. People often ask a simple question: how did a poor boy with almost no education become one of the greatest leaders in history? The answer was not wealth, family connections, or luck. It was persistence, curiosity, and an unbreakable belief in learning. Lincoln taught himself by reading every book he could find, often walking miles just to borrow one. Over time, he learned that words could be more powerful than weapons. Lincoln did not become president during peaceful years. He became president when the country was breaking apart. Every decision he made was criticized. Every mistake was printed in newspapers across the country. Yet Lincoln continued to move forward even when he doubted himself. Leadership cost him his health, his sleep, and eventually his life. But even after his death, the ideas he fought for continued to grow stronger. His story did not end in 1865. It continues every time people talk about freedom, justice, and equality. When we study people like Abraham Lincoln, we are not only learning about the past, we are also learning about ourselves. Lincoln was not born powerful or rich. He began his life like millions of other children in poverty. He did not become great in a single moment. His life changed through thousands of small decisions. Lincoln lost elections, failed in business, and faced many personal tragedies before he reached the White House. Many people would have stopped trying. Lincoln did not. In our modern world, his story reminds us that success rarely comes quickly or easily. Lincoln lived in a time when public opinion could turn against a leader in a single day. He often made decisions that were unpopular because he believed they were morally right. True leadership can be lonely, especially when the future of a nation depends on your choices. Behind the speeches and the statues was a man who worried, doubted, and sometimes felt afraid. Even when he was unsure, he continued to speak about unity, freedom, and equality. His speeches were short and simple, yet they carried ideas strong enough to survive for generations. We continue to tell Lincoln's story because it shows what is possible when knowledge and courage come together. And perhaps in some small way, his story is also your story, a journey of learning, mistakes, and growth. Let's return to where this story began, a small wooden cabin in the wilderness. A young boy sits near a candle holding a book that is bigger than his hands. He does not know that one day he will lead a nation through war. That path would take him through loss, failure, doubt, and finally history. Today, more than a century later, his name is still spoken with respect around the world. His life teaches us that where we begin does not decide where we can go. Every person who learns, grows, and refuses to give up writes their own story, just as Lincoln did. Thank you for spending this time with us and walking through this story together. And perhaps tonight, somewhere in the world, another child is reading by candlelight, beginning a story that will one day change history.